The afternoon sun beat down on the dusty streets of Timber Falls as Garrett Kane pushed through the doors of the Rusty Nail Saloon. He was an imposing figure, standing well over 6 feet tall and carrying himself with the kind of arrogance that comes from years of unchallenged brutality. His reputation for violence stretched across 3 territories, and for the past 3 weeks, he and his gang had terrorized this dying mining town without consequence. Behind the bar stood a frail-looking man in his 70s, polishing glasses with hands that trembled slightly. His white hair caught the dim light filtering through the saloon's grimy windows, and wire-rimmed spectacles sat perched on a nose that had clearly been broken more than once. He didn't look up when Kane approached, just kept working steadily at his task. Kane's voice came out as a snarl when he demanded whiskey, making it clear he had no intention of paying. The bartender's response was simple and calm, explaining that house rules required everyone to pay, same as it had been for 30 years. This didn't sit well with the big man. In one swift motion, Kane grabbed the old bartender by his collar and yanked him halfway across the bar. His face twisted with contempt as he declared that the rules had just changed. What Garrett Kane didn't know was that the tired old man he was manhandling was Henry Dalton. 3 decades earlier, Henry had been the most respected firearms instructor west of the Mississippi River. He had taught some of the greatest names in Western history how to draw and shoot. Wyatt Earp had learned to draw from the hip under Henry's patient instruction. Wild Bill Hickok had studied under him, learning to read an opponent's intentions in their eyes before their hand ever moved toward their gun. Even a young Bat Masterson had spent time at Henry's ranch, discovering that accuracy mattered far more than raw speed. Over the years, Henry had trained 47 men who went on to become legends. He had also buried 32 of them. The weight of all those deaths, all that violence he had enabled, eventually became too much to bear. When his wife Margaret lay dying, he made her a solemn promise that he would hang up his guns forever. He sold his training facility outside Abilene, sold his custom-made revolvers, and disappeared into obscurity. For 30 years, he had been just another old man tending bar in a forgotten town, trying to atone for a lifetime of teaching men how to kill. Now, with Kane's hand twisted in his collar, Henry felt something inside himself go very still and very quiet. It was a sensation he hadn't experienced in 3 decades, a cold clarity that settled over him like fresh snow. He could smell the whiskey on Kane's breath and see the casual cruelty in his bloodshot eyes. He had seen 1,000 men like this one, bullies who confuse size with strength and violence with power. Henry spoke quietly, asking Kane to release his shirt. There was no anger in his voice, no fear, just a simple statement of fact. Kane laughed, a harsh sound like rocks grinding together, and asked what the old man planned to do about it. By this time, Kane's 3 companions had wandered into the saloon, spreading out in a way that would have concerned anyone with tactical awareness. Henry's mind, rusty from disuse but not broken, automatically cataloged each threat. The Mexican on the left wore his Remington high on his hip, suggesting he would be slow but steady. The young one in the middle couldn't have been more than 20, with 2 pistols worn low in the showy style of someone trying to look dangerous. He would be fast but undisciplined, spraying bullets everywhere without hitting much of anything. The one on the right was different, older and more measured, with cold eyes and a single gun positioned for maximum efficiency. That one had killed before and would be genuinely dangerous. Henry gave Kane one last warning, and this time something underneath his words made the big man's grin falter slightly. "Let go, pay for your drink, and leave," Henry said. "Do that and we can forget this ever happened." For just a moment, Kane seemed to consider it. Something about those gray eyes didn't quite match the shaking hands and stooped shoulders. But pride proved stronger than instinct. His hand came up and cracked across Henry's face with a sound like a gunshot echoing through the silent saloon. Henry's spectacles flew off and skittered across the bar. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth as his head snapped to the side. He staggered backward, one hand going to his reddening cheek. Through the window, faces began to appear as townspeople were drawn by the commotion. For 3 weeks, they had watched Kane's gang take whatever they wanted and hurt whoever protested. The sheriff lay in his bed, beaten so badly he couldn't stand. Nobody had been able to stop them. Henry straightened slowly and touched his split lip, looking at the blood on his fingertips. Then he did something that made Garrett Kane's triumphant expression freeze. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, or even an angry one. It was the smile of a man who had just made a decision he knew he would regret. The smile of someone who understood exactly how this would end and had accepted it. Kane's hand dropped to his gun as he asked if the old man was threatening him. Henry bent to retrieve his spectacles, noting that one lens was badly cracked. He set them carefully on the bar and turned back to face Kane. His eyes had changed now, grown colder and harder, like looking at tombstones in a graveyard. In a quiet voice that carried to every corner of the now-silent saloon, Henry explained exactly who Kane was, a bully who only picked fights with people unable to defend themselves. Then he revealed his own identity. His name was Henry Dalton, and 30 years ago, he had run a training facility where he taught men how to draw, shoot, and kill efficiently. Every legendary name Kane had ever heard, they had all learned from him. Kane's expression shifted from anger to uncertainty. Even in his arrogance, he recognized those names as belonging to men who had shaped the West with blood and lead. He accused Henry of lying, of being just an old bartender spinning tall tales, but his voice lacked conviction. Henry walked to the end of the bar and reached underneath, pulling out a locked wooden box covered in rust. He produced a key from around his neck and opened it to reveal a gun belt wrapped in oiled cloth. The leather was old but meticulously maintained, and the holster was custom-made for a specific draw style. The revolver itself was a work of art, a Colt single-action army with ivory grips and intricate scrollwork engraved into the metal. Along the barrel were 47 small notches, one for each student who had become a legend. Henry hadn't touched this gun since the day he buried Margaret, hadn't worn it since making that deathbed promise to leave violence behind forever. But Margaret had never met Garrett Kane, never seen what happened when evil went unchecked and unchallenged. The gun belt settled around Henry's waist as though it had never left. His hands no longer shook as he buckled it with practiced ease and adjusted the position until it sat exactly where muscle memory demanded. He explained that he had been retired for 30 years and sworn never to fire this gun again. But Kane had struck him in his own establishment in front of witnesses, and if he let that stand, every bully in the territory would think they could do the same. So they would step outside and settle this the old way, with a fast draw. The winner would walk away, and the loser would be buried on Boot Hill. Kane tried to laugh, but it came out strangled. He boasted of being the fastest gun in 3 territories and having killed 19 men. Henry's response was factual and devastating. He had counted those 19 deaths and knew exactly who they were. 3 shopkeepers, 5 ranch hands for drunks, 2 old men, not a single real gunfighter among them. Kane was fast at killing slow men, Henry observed, and that wasn't the same thing as being fast. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Kane's companions exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly realizing their boss's reputation was built on beating men who couldn't fight back. Henry offered Kane one final choice: walk away now, take his boys, leave Timber Falls, and never return. Do that and live. But Kane's pride was too strong. With his men watching, he couldn't back down from an old bartender, no matter who he claimed to be. Henry pushed through the door into the afternoon sunlight and walked into the middle of the wide, dusty street. He positioned himself with the sun at his back, putting the glare in his opponent's eyes. It was an old trick, one he had taught Wyatt Earp decades earlier. His hand rested loose near his gun, not touching, just waiting. The street filled with townspeople drawn by the confrontation. They whispered questions to each other, wondering who this old man really was and whether he could actually face down Garrett Kane. Inside the saloon, Kane was trying to think his way out, but his pride proved louder than his instincts. He stepped outside with his 3 men flanking him and walked forward 10 paces. 40 feet separated the 2 men. Kane called out one final warning, trying to reclaim his swagger, but Henry's quiet response cut through all the bluster. They would remember this, he said simply. They always did. The crowd fell completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Henry's mind calculated automatically, reading Kane's body language the way he had taught 47 students to do. The tension in the shoulders, the distribution of weight, the way the hand hovered near the gun. Size meant nothing in a gunfight. Actually worked against you by making a bigger target and slowing reflexes. He watched Kane work up his courage, saw the internal argument between pride and survival play out across the big man's face. Kane's hand dropped toward his gun, fingers wrapping around the grip. He was fast, faster than Henry had expected. The Colt Dragoon cleared leather in a blur, the hammer already cocking back. But Henry Dalton had taught all the legends, and he had always been faster than any of them. His draw was smooth as silk, economical and perfect, with no wasted movement. The revolver appeared in his hand like magic. The motion so practiced, it had become unconscious. His hammer fell a split second before Kane's finger found the trigger. Two guns roared almost simultaneously, but not quite. Henry's shot came first, and that fraction of a second made all the difference. The bullet caught Kane dead center in the chest, punching through his sternum and destroying his heart. Kane's shot went high and wide, his aim thrown off by the impact. The big man staggered, eyes going wide with shock and genuine surprise as blood spread across his shirt. His revolver fell from nerveless fingers. He dropped to his knees, looked down at the hole in his chest, then pitched forward into the dust. The street was silent for 3 heartbeats. Then Kane's 3 companions went for their guns. Henry's second shot took the Mexican in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his Remington flying. The young one managed to clear both pistols and fired 5 wild shots, none coming within 3 feet of their target. Henry's third shot caught him in the thigh, dropping him hard. That left the dangerous one, the older man with cold eyes who had drawn and aimed before Henry could bring his Colt around for a 4th shot. For a moment, they were locked in a standoff, 2 professionals with guns pointed at each other. But the dangerous one could see that he was facing someone who had done this 100 times before, someone whose hand was steady and whose aim was true. Slowly, carefully, he lowered his gun and tossed it aside, raising his hands in surrender. Henry told him to collect his friends, get them to a doctor, then ride out of Timber Falls and never come back. The man agreed without argument, helping his wounded companions to their horses and leaving Kane's body lying in the street. Henry stood alone in the middle of the road, smoke curling from his revolver's barrel. His hand was shaking now with delayed reaction to the adrenaline. His shoulder ached and his knees felt weak. He wasn't a young man anymore, and his body was reminding him forcefully. The crowd surged forward, surrounding him with congratulations and touching his arm. They saw him as their hero and savior. But Henry didn't feel like a hero. He felt old and tired and sick. He had just killed a man for the first time in 30 years, and it felt exactly like he remembered. Hollow and empty, with no satisfaction, just the weight of another body added to his count. The town doctor helped him to a bench as his legs gave out. Henry sat heavily, looking at the gun in his hand as though he had never seen it before. The mayor rushed over to offer him the position of town marshal, but Henry refused flatly. He wasn't a lawman and never had been. He was just a bartender who had killed a man, nothing more. He instructed them to bury Kane's body, check on his horse, and send word to the territorial marshal about what had happened. That evening, Henry walked to the small cemetery at the edge of town, where a simple marker stood over Margaret's grave. Kneeling beside it, he confessed that he had broken his promise. A bad man had come to town, and nobody else could stop him. So he had done what he swore he would never do again. He admitted that it didn't feel like salvation, just like falling back into old habits, like discovering he was still that same man under all those years of pretending. 3 days later, a young marshal named Carson Blake arrived to take Henry's statement. He revealed that he had been trained by Jack Prescott, who had studied under Henry back in 1874. Henry learned that Jack had died 3 years earlier with an arrow through his neck during a bank robbery, another student added to the list of the dead. But Carson brought an unexpected offer from the territorial marshal's office. They needed training officers who could teach deputies and sheriffs how to be lawmen, not just gunfighters. Men who understood when to shoot and, crucially, when not to. Henry considered the offer carefully. The West was changing, becoming civilized, but it still needed men who could teach the next generation not just how to fight, but why to fight and when not to. After a week of deliberation, he accepted on his own terms. He would train people in Timber Falls only, wouldn't travel, wouldn't wear a badge, wouldn't enforce laws. He would just teach. Over the next 5 years, Henry Dalton trained 63 lawmen. Not one became a famous gunfighter or got their name in the papers. But collectively, they saved hundreds of lives, stopped dozens of outlaws, and kept the peace in towns across the frontier. They were invisible men, making the West safer one town at a time, and Henry watched them go with pride instead of fear. Timber Falls thrived under their protection. With well-trained deputies and a reputation for standing against evil, families moved in and businesses opened. What had been dying slowly came alive again. Henry continued tending bar, but 3 mornings a week he taught, shaping the future one student at a time. 10 years after facing Garrett Kane, Henry's body finally gave out. His heart was failing, and he knew his time had come. Students traveled from across the West to say goodbye and thank him. Even Wyatt Earp made the journey from Arizona to sit beside his bed and talk about the old days. Wyatt told him he'd done good work, better than he knew, teaching men not just to shoot but to think and choose. On a quiet evening in late spring, Henry Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep at 75 years old. Nearly 300 people attended his funeral, lawmen from across the West whose lives and careers he had shaped. They buried him next to Margaret, and each lawman present fired 3 shots into the sky in traditional salute, the thunder echoing across the valley for miles. His legacy lived on in the men he trained and the men they trained in turn, carrying forward his lessons that violence was a last resort, that the gun was a tool rather than a trophy, and that protecting the innocent mattered more than personal glory. The Rusty Nail became a historical landmark, and Timber Falls erected a statue showing Henry teaching a student, patient and methodical. The plaque beneath read that he had taught legends how to shoot straight, then taught lawmen something better. He taught them justice.